Half-a-day students, I am Governor Lou Leon Guerrero. You all have been through a year of big changes. We've had to adapt and make big changes to keep our families and our island safe. But with change comes opportunity and a chance to try new things like PBS University. While Lieutenant Governor Josh Tenorio and I will continue to do our part to keep our island safe, you students have a part to play as well. Your part is to keep learning and to keep up with your lessons. That's why I am happy to see you here ready to learn with PBS University. PBS University is a way to bring a continuous educational curriculum to you while you stay safe at home during this time. To help you keep up with your studies, we asked our friends at PBS Guam and the Guam Department of Education to put together this episode. Thank you for doing your part and have a great lesson.
Humanities Guåhan, an independent nonprofit organization affiliated with the National Endowment for the Humanities, is dedicated to promoting public humanities programming for the people of Guam and providing foundational support and educational resources for our island community. For more information about Humanities Guåhan, visit www.humanitiesguahan.org. The following webinar series is part of a project presented by Humanities Guåhan entitled Unincorporated, Voting, Voices, and Visions Para Guåhan. This project explores Chamorro stories, experiences, and perspectives on civic engagement in relation to voting rights, democracy, political status, and Chamorro self-determination. Unincorporated consisted of the 5-part webinar series that took place from January through May 2021 and covered topics on the origins of Chamorro self-determination, the work of the Commission on Decolonization, the relationship between art and decolonization, and the role of the U.S. legal system as it relates to Guam's political status. The project culminated with the launch of an online and printed magazine distributed throughout the community, which consists of essays, creative reflections, and artwork exploring issues around Guåhan's political status and decolonization through the perspectives and historical and political experiences of the Chamorro people of Guåhan.
We argue and expand and talk about it in concrete terms because, again, we're a territory, unincorporated territory. Most people, that has no impact on them in their minds, on their day-to-day activities. That's where the challenge is. How do you make it real in terms of what it would mean to change our status?
I got a question. What important lessons on self-determination have you learned on any of the cases that you've worked on?
As a general proposition, I will say that we don't give enough credit to those who have come before us and have worked hard to get us. I mean, I think the fight for citizenship, and yes, we've named a school after FB Leon Guerrero, but I see a lot of, maybe not my generation, or my generation too, like we don't realize how hard it was to move the ball and to advance the discussion at all. Having an elected governor, we're joined by the governor today, like that took effort. Getting a Supreme Court was a huge political effort to get done. So all of these things that we've accomplished, I think it may not be the direction we want to go, but there was a lot of energy and fight put into it. And citizenship is, again, I come back to it. People fought hard because they thought citizenship was the way that we were going to gain all these other rights and this other access to being able to move towards self-determination. It didn't pan out that way, but they didn't have the benefit of knowing that at the time. So as we develop what we want, plebiscite, maybe 20 or 30 years from now, they're going to be like, what was that generation doing, wasting decades on the plebiscite when they should have been doing A, B, and C? I guess my lesson would be, when you look back at all the effort and energy that's been put into this, like just to be mindful and respectful and not to be dismissive of, why would anyone want to be a U.S. citizen? Because our nanas and tatas fought for that and to get us to where we're at today. And maybe we go a different direction, but it's always okay to be respectful.
Going back to your frozen yogurt analogy, what flavor would you deem as the core values or important principles for the people in Guam to understand and consider? And what toppings should be taken lightly?
Well, I mean, I think for me, and it really comes back to the consent of the governed. And if we can't achieve that, that seems like a very basic thing. The Declaration of Independence talked about that's how governments are formed. And Dr. Underwood, you planted that seed in my head whenever you would walk into Congress, that's there and present. It's just, we haven't gotten to the point where we have control over our own government. And yes, it looks like other governments and it smells like other governments, but we're black licorice yogurt right now. So whatever it is moving forward, if it's statehood, if it's free association, or if it's independence, we just need to fix the core, and then the voting rights and equal protection and all of that should flow from that source and not in reverse.
I appreciate that sentiment that we should appreciate the work that's come, the efforts that it took to get to where we are today, to get citizenship, to get the Organic Act and a civilian government. But do you think that there are lessons to be learned in terms of timing and how we coordinate and focus our efforts and when?
With DC pushing for statehood, I know Puerto Rico, there's a lot more. I believe there was a recent bill that was introduced. So there has to be an urgency generated, not only locally, but nationally, when that moment happened. But it feels like we're still uncertain on the ground where we want to go. So it's hard to capitalize on that movement or that momentum. Yeah, I don't know the answer to that.
Thank you. We have one more question. To clarify, in terms of being an unincorporated territory under the insular cases, we do not have fundamental rights under the Constitution, and we only have personal rights. And this is what is preventing us from voting as president. What exactly do you mean by personal rights? And is that a correct summation of what you had stated in terms of what those cases do?
DC had an amendment passed to participate in the Electoral College. The Ninth Circuit basically said, Guam, the president is not elected by popular vote. So the only way for you to meaningfully participate in the presidential election is to have electors, which you either need to become a state or you need to get an amendment passed that extends it to you. In this political climate, I don't see that happening with the partisanship. And so I don't know what the viability is of an amendment being passed that would give Guam electors. But if there's national change to make it, that would be interesting if they were to change it to a popular vote and the president is elected by popular vote. Would Guam be able to participate in it at that point because we would have removed the electoral college system? That's an interesting question. I don't know the answer. Vanessa, you have thoughts? How would you vote on that?
I don't know. Nicole, were we trying to get questions to be asked live on camera now? Maybe that would help clarify too. And some of these questions that are considered open have not been resolved.
People are invited. They want to ask their questions live. They may. I think they've also put them in the Q&A. But if anybody would like to ask a question, there's a feature that allows us to unmute you or allow you to talk. If you're interested, I can go ahead and do that. So all the attendees there can let me know through the chat, and I can go ahead and allow that. We did have this other question. I'm sorry if you guys already answered this, but the question is, some U.S. Supreme Court precedents, like the insular cases, cause problems with efforts to move forward with either self-determination or to seek rights that others enjoy within the U.S. What has been done or can be done to overturn this kind of precedent?
I can't speak to exhaustively all the cases that have been done, but those cases that I kind of highlighted at the end, in particular, the Fitzimano, and then might be resolved soon, and then the Aurelius case that was decided. So that U.S. Supreme Court case, although it declined to rely on the insular cases and their doctrine in reaching their decision, it did indicate where they're at in terms of how they see the insular cases. And when I went through the background of that and showed how, I guess not the typical, or the challenge is kind of indirect, right? This came out as a result of challenging a law that provided oversight for Puerto Rico's finances and essentially veto power to Puerto Rico's governor. Plaintiff was actually like a hedge fund. And you can see how the insular cases cases could be overturned. And there's definitely been arguments made in this case, the Aurelius case, and in others that I discussed that are trying to get the Supreme Court to say, you're right, this is what insular cases does, but it's no longer good law, and overturn it that way. It may be in a way that we do not anticipate or indirectly. I don't think when the hedge fund brought the lawsuit, they were seeking to overturn the insular cases. It was kind of an unlikely ally for Puerto Rico in that respect.
I'll just add, we have our Supreme Court argument in the Ordot case coming up in about a month now, but it's extremely rare for the Supreme Court to accept cases, and they only will do so under very limited circumstances. Vanessa's involved in a case with voting rights, but a circuit split is another example where the Supreme Court will kind of intervene because they want to establish a uniform application of law. The Supreme Court recently accepted this last term challenge to Social Security benefits and the exclusion of Puerto Rican residents, and they're going to be hearing that probably in the fall of this year. And I find it fascinating as not a historian, but I always enjoy reading Justice Marshall, Thurgood Marshall, and seeing when he would vote with Justice Brennan. But Thurgood Marshall is a champion of the territories, I would say, when it comes to Supreme Court justices. And the Supreme Court cases that said you can exclude the territories from benefits were decided without oral argument. They were decided summarily. And Justice Marshall was the only one who dissented, basically saying, we should at least give this the full hearing and briefing before we decide something that has such a huge impact on what would turn out to be millions of people who live in the territories who are U.S. citizens. So that will probably be one of the biggest insular case updates that we're going to get, in decades. And the implications are huge, and the stakes are very high. I saw Dr. Underwood commented, no taxation without representation, or representation without taxation. And really what it comes down to is adding Puerto Rico and the territories to SSI would increase it by 3%. And the argument is because you guys don't pay federal income tax, and Puerto Rico, if you have a chance to read the briefs, they're amazing because they point out that I guess Puerto Rico generates more tax income, not income tax, but taxes than 6 states do when you kind of expand the category of contributing to the federal fisc. There was a district court decision that came out recently on SNAP benefits in Puerto Rico on Medicaid that struck down the exclusion of Puerto Rican residents from those programs. And, I'm going to brag and say he was my evidence professor at Young, sitting out of Massachusetts. It's a beautifully written decision and order. And if you have a chance to read it, I will want to pay homage to Judge Torreya, who passed away this year. And he was, again, a great champion for the territories and for equality in the territories. And he was the author of the First Circuit decision that struck down the exclusion of Puerto Rican residents from SSI benefits and the implications that it would have for Guam. These things have been going on for such a long time, but that Vallejo Madero case will probably be the watershed case for our generation.
So, Leevin, or Vanessa, thank you so much. I learned a lot. My comment and my question about the argument that the U.S. is going to make with the vote, if we were to be given a right to vote for president, they would use that to argue about status quo. I think that's what they would use that. Why do you want to do self-determination when now you can vote for president and now maybe you can have a congressional voting representative? And I know that previous secretaries of the Department of Interior were the ones that were pursuing this status quo. So basically what it is I think giving us some rights, but not all, as to our own self-governance. That's where I was coming from in that comment.
Thank you, Governor.
I agree. It's a concern. I think that was part of the concern when it came to the Constitution, just being mindful of what these actions and the long-term implications could be. And Puerto Rico, I believe, got a reality check with the Promesa cases there was a double jeopardy case that was also argued a little bit before that, where the Supreme Court, I want to say it was just Justice Ginsburg, who was the author, said you have no sovereignty outside of the federal government. So, that probably rankled a lot of the folks in Puerto Rico, just to be reminded that territories are all the same. You might be the fanciest territory, but you're no different than Guam in a lot of ways. And no one wants to be compared to Guam, right? When you've got a commonwealth, you have a constitution, you have an Article 3 judge. But going back again to the fixings, and we were just plain yogurt. They had all the trappings, but we're still yogurt at the end of the day.
And I just want to make one more comment before I know Dr. Underwood also probably wanted to chime in. But this issue about the Davis versus Guam. And now we can move forward with the plebiscite, but we have to allow everyone who's not a native inhabitant. And I think the political question is, do we want to just have the native inhabitants be eligible for voting? Or do we want to include everyone that is in Guam? And right now, we cannot do just native inhabitants, like you had mentioned, because the court says you cannot. It's declared unconstitutional. My issue here is if we decide to just be very strong and say native inhabitants only, then we would have to make some changes to our plebiscite legislation, I understand, to address some of the concerns that was brought up in the 9th District Court. And I'm not too sure what all those concerns are, but my understanding is that we may be able to pursue native inhabitants as eligible if we redo our plebiscite legislation to address the concerns of the district court. Are you following that at all, Leevin?
I am, Governor. We were on parallel tracks with the Chamorro Land Trust. In a lot of ways, the Chamorro Land Trust case had us ask ourselves, and thank you, and I know Attorney Phillips was very involved in it, but what is the actual point of the program? And, that's a political question, but it ended up being, we convinced the Department of Justice that this really was a land restoration program in response to the vast quantities of land that were taken from locals after World War II. It's a similar kind of soul searching we need to have when it comes to the plebiscite. What is it that we are trying to accomplish? And then that will dictate who should be allowed to participate. If it's just to get a temperature check on everyone, what do we want, which A, B, or C, and it would be much easier to open up for everyone. But if it really is, it's meant as a tool of decolonization, then the question is, how do you define who is colonized without using a race-based classification, which is what I believe the Ninth Circuit found impermissible.
Thank you.
Hi, how are you doing, Vanessa? And Leevin, and thank you very much for our presentation. That takes a lot of detailed work, and I appreciate the effort that's put into it. I'm kind of a politician, although I like to think of myself as a teacher more than a politician, but I should have been a lawyer because, the thing is that when you're in a tough position as a lawyer, you can always say, that's a political decision. I love that. I just love that. And of course, in many respects, it is. And so the question is really assessing the political environment that we're in right now. And the political environment that we're in, and the Biden administration is certainly different than it is in the Trump administration, and certainly was even different from the Obama administration, which in this regard, and these issues may have been actually a disappointment. But then, of course, we don't know whether that disappointment resulted from the lack of concerted effort from Guam and the territories. And that's why the Obama administration wasn't as engaged. So hopefully, as a result of this conversation, there would be an effort to kind of secure a place inside the Biden administration head or policy making about dealing with territorial issues as an administrative matter, as a matter of executive branch policy. When up to now, every time that question has been raised, they always defer to Congress and they say, Congress has plenary power. Yes, Congress has plenary power, but the executive branch always has the right, I would say the obligation to introduce legislation in Congress that could move. And they're signaling their support for a given direction would make a lot of difference. So there's, I think, a little bit more hope in the Biden-Harris administration to secure this. And if the Puerto Rican issue and the District of Columbia issues are resolved, then it really opens up the way for the smaller territories, because in reality, that's the other political hurdle we have to face, is that whatever we're able to achieve will automatically sort of accrue to Puerto Rico in particular. And so if they don't want to give it to Puerto Rico, then they're not likely to give it to us. But if, all bets are off the table with Puerto Rico and they decide to become a state and that comes to pass, then all of these are certainly so much easier. And so I just wanted to congratulate you and just kind of plant that kind of thinking.
These webinars can be accessed on Humanities Guåhan's Facebook page. To view the online magazine associated with Unincorporated Voting, Voices, and Visions Para Guåhan, visit humanitiesguåhan.org/unincorporated.
Hafa students, I'm Lieutenant Governor Josh Tenorio. For more than a year now, you all have continued to wash your hands and watch your distance from others, and you've done a really great job wearing your masks. We know your parents and guardians have helped you to make these changes to keep yourself and your community safe. As Governor Leevin Guerrero said, we are happy you are here. We want you to continue to learn and sharpen your skills with the help of PBS University. This program is the result of a collaborative effort. We couldn't do it alone. I'd like to thank the teachers and support staff of the Guam Department of Education and PBS Guam for their work and their commitment to our students. I'd also like to thank you students for participating at home. To your parents, I'd like to thank you for taking an active role in your child's education. We are all eager to return to a time when all of us can share and study together in person. Until then, we hope you learned something new from this PBS University instruction.